They say every neighborhood has a soul. In Willow Bend Estates, it wasn't the houses, the lawns, or even the people who gave it life. It was the playground. Every evening, that little patch of land turned into the heart of the neighborhood. The metal swing set squeaked like an old song. The slide shimmered in the sun, and laughter echoed between the trees. Parents gathered with coffee cups. Children chased fireflies until the streetlights blinked on. It wasn't just a playground, it was where life happened. And then, it was gone. Not overnight. Not all at once. It disappeared piece by piece. Until one morning, all that remained was a chain-link fence and a plastic sign that said, "Closed for maintenance." But let's go back to before all that, when everyone still believed Willow Bend was a perfect place to live. At the top of that world sat Gerald Langford, the longtime HOA president. Crisp shirt, practiced smile. The kind of man who spoke in phrases like community excellence and long-term vision. To most people, Gerald was a hero, the man who kept their property values high and their lawns uniform. But to Sarah Klein, he was something else. Sarah lived in the corner house, the one that faced the playground. 2 kids, a husband who worked night shifts, and a dog that barked at everything. She wasn't the type to stir trouble. She volunteered, paid her dues, followed the rules. But she was also the type who noticed things, like how the HOA newsletters had started to sound more like sales pitches, or how the phrase revitalization project kept showing up without explanation. Still, when the flyer arrived, special HOA meeting, community improvement proposal, she went, notebook in hand. The clubhouse was packed that night. Folding chairs in neat rows, the faint buzz of the old ceiling fan, the smell of fresh coffee someone had brought from home. Gerald stood at the front, behind a cheap podium with the Willow Bend logo. "Friends," he began, smiling like he was on stage, "our neighborhood is beautiful, but we can do better. It's time to think ahead. It's time to improve." A PowerPoint appeared on the projector. The Willow Bend Enhancement Initiative. Glossy slides of benches, walking paths, a new sign at the entrance. People nodded approvingly. A few clapped. Then Gerald clicked again, and a bright digital rendering filled the screen. A modern plaza with stone paving, decorative lights, and in the corner where the playground should have been, a small parking lot. Sarah frowned. She raised her hand. "What about the playground?" Gerald's smile never faltered. "The equipment's aging. Liability risk. We're considering temporary removal while we assess safety upgrades." "Temporary?" she asked. "Of course," he said, moving on to the next slide before she could say more. Now about funding. After the meeting, the crowd buzzed with excitement. "Finally some upgrades," someone said. "It's about time," another added. But Sarah lingered outside, under the streetlight, staring back at the glowing clubhouse window. Something in Gerald's voice didn't sound right. Too smooth, too rehearsed. When she walked home past the playground, she saw the swings swaying softly in the night breeze, the chains whispering like they already knew what was coming. The next week, orange cones appeared around the sandbox. A small crew arrived, no announcement, no letter, and began dismantling the swing set. By evening, half the playground was gone. Children stood at the tape's edge, confused. Parents muttered, "Must be repairs." By the end of the week, the entire area was fenced off. A sign appeared, "Closed for safety inspection. Thank you for your cooperation." But no workers returned. No updates, just silence. Weeks passed. The neighborhood's rhythm changed. Without the playground, families stopped gathering. Children stayed indoors. The evening laughter vanished. The sense of community, that invisible thread that tied everyone together, started to fray. Then, one morning, a new notice appeared in every mailbox. Community beautification fee, $250 per household. No explanation, no vote, just an invoice attached to a glossy flyer of the same plaza design from Gerald's slideshow. Sarah knocked on her neighbor Lydia's door, the HOA treasurer. "Did the board approve this?" Lydia looked startled. "I didn't even know about it," she whispered. "Gerald handles most of the correspondence now." That was the moment Sarah realized. The board wasn't running the HOA anymore. Gerald was. She started asking questions, polite ones at first. But the responses grew colder. Emails went unanswered. The HOA website suddenly went under maintenance. Minutes from meetings vanished from the archive. And then one evening, Sarah noticed a stranger. A man in a gray suit, standing near the fenced-off lot, clipboard in hand. When she asked who he was, he smiled faintly and said, "Just taking some measurements. I'm with Harper Development." "Development of what?" she asked. "Future projects," he said, and walked away. The next day, the HOA sent another cheerful email. Exciting partnership announcement. Willow Bend and Harper Development. No mention of the playground. Just words like revitalization, progress, and investment opportunity. Sarah's instinct screamed. She started printing every email, every notice, every photo of the empty lot. She made a binder labeled Playground File. When she couldn't find answers, she went door to door. Some neighbors shrugged. Others said, "If it helps property values, who cares?" But a small group, joined her. Parents who missed the sound of their kids playing outside. Retirees who remembered when Willow Bend had community picnics instead of board meetings. Together, they gathered enough signatures to demand a special HOA meeting. That meeting never happened. An hour before it was supposed to start, everyone received a text from Gerald. "Meeting postponed due to misinformation being circulated. Please await official updates." That word again. Misinformation. Sarah knew what it meant. Someone was hiding something. A few nights later, Lydia appeared at her door. Her hands were trembling, clutching a manila folder. "I shouldn't be giving you this," she whispered. Inside were emails. Dozens of them. Between Gerald and Harper Development. Dates. Numbers. Signatures. The earliest one was from 3 months before the first community improvement meeting. Gerald, confirm parcel transfer process for Lot 7, playground area. Appreciate your discretion. Deposit will be wired once HOA approval is recorded. Sarah read it twice. The playground had already been sold. The community improvement talk, the meetings, the votes, the smiles had been for show. Her hands shook as she closed the folder. Outside, the night was silent. The streetlights buzzed faintly over the empty lot. The gravel shimmered under the moonlight. Cold, gray, lifeless. For the first time, Willow Bend didn't feel like home. Later, as she tucked her daughter into bed, little Emma asked, "Mom, when are they bringing the playground back?" Sarah forced a smile. "Soon, sweetheart." But deep down she knew it was gone. Sold. And she wasn't going to let it go quietly. Because somewhere, behind the polished smiles and HOA letterheads, a deal had been made in secret, and her neighborhood had been stolen piece by piece, starting with the swings. The next morning, every mailbox in Willow Bend had a fresh flyer. Bold letters, cheerful design, special HOA meeting, community improvement discussion. Same title, same promise. But this time, Sarah wasn't just going to attend. She was going to fight back. Because she had proof. It's the word every community loves to hear. It sounds hopeful, forward-thinking. A promise that tomorrow will be better than today. But in Willow Bend Estates, progress wasn't what it seemed. It was the first sign that something was about to go very wrong. After that first special HOA meeting, residents carried home a strange mix of excitement and confusion. Gerald Langford's speech had painted a beautiful picture. Upgraded walking trails, new lighting, maybe even a small community cafe. He used all the right phrases: community investment, beautification, future value. Most people didn't notice what was missing: details. Where the money would come from, who would do the work, or what would happen to the land that had once been the playground. Sarah Klein noticed. She started small, asking simple questions. When was the next meeting? What contractor was handling the renovations? Could residents see the budget? Days passed. No reply. Then, one morning, she received an email signed by HOA administration. No name, just a message. "Thank you for your inquiry. Project details are being finalized." Updates will be posted soon. Please refrain from circulating speculation. Speculation. That word again. It had appeared before, in Gerald's message canceling the last meeting. To most people, it sounded harmless. To Sarah, it sounded like a warning. The following week, the sound of engines echoed across Willow Bend. Trucks arrived, carrying materials, wooden posts, concrete. Workers in orange vests fenced off not just the playground, but the small grove of oak trees beside it. The same grove where parents used to sit during summer picnics. No one from the HOA had said anything about trees. Sarah walked up to one of the workers. "Excuse me," she said. "What are you building here?" The man shrugged. "Ma'am, we just follow the site plan. Says here, future parking expansion." "Parking?" she repeated. "For what?" He gave her a puzzled look, as if she should already know. "Community Plaza project," he said. "Supposed to be some kind of upgrade." She took a photo of the clipboard before he could turn it away. Printed in the corner of the paper were the words, Harper Development Group. The same name she'd heard from the man in the gray suit weeks earlier. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers. The playground file, now thicker, heavier, filled with printouts of every HOA email, flyer, and notice she'd received since the improvement plan began. She circled every mention of Harper Development. 5 times. Always described the same way, consulting partner. She decided to call Lydia, the former treasurer who had slipped her the folder. Lydia answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tight. "Sarah, I can't talk long. Gerald's been asking questions." "About what?" "About you," Lydia said quietly. "He wants to know who's been spreading misinformation." "So now I'm the problem?" Sarah asked. "He's selling our land, and I'm the one being watched?" Lydia hesitated. "You don't understand. He's connected. His brother-in-law's on the city zoning board. He's been doing this for years, just smaller stuff. This is the first time it's something big." "What's this?" Sarah pressed. "Deals," Lydia whispered. "Side deals. Quiet ones." Meanwhile, Gerald's tone at HOA meetings had changed. Gone was the friendly, neighborly president who asked for feedback. In his place stood a man who spoke in prepared statements. Certain individuals, he announced during one session, are spreading false claims about board activities. Let me be clear. Every decision made is in full accordance with HOA policy and city regulations. A few people nodded automatically. Most just wanted to go home. But Sarah raised her hand. "Then show us the contract," she said. "Show us the agreement with Harper Development." Gerald smiled tightly. "Contracts are confidential during negotiation. You'll have access once everything is finalized." "Finalized?" she repeated. "You mean it's already approved?" He shifted papers, avoiding eye contact. Meeting adjourned. The crowd shuffled out, murmuring. A few neighbors gave Sarah sympathetic looks, but others glanced away, afraid of being seen supporting her. By the time she reached home, a notice had already appeared in her inbox. A civility reminder. It warned residents against disruptive behavior or publicly undermining board decisions. Failure to comply could result in fines. Her name wasn't mentioned, but she knew exactly who it was for. At this point, Sarah wasn't alone, not completely. A handful of residents had started reaching out privately. Mark Peterson, who'd lived there 15 years, said he'd seen trucks unloading materials late at night. An older couple on Maple Court claimed they'd received a letter from the HOA offering to purchase easement rights behind their property, for reasons never explained. And a young father named Nate sent Sarah a screenshot of a zoning request filed at the city planning office. A request to reclassify Lot 7 from recreational to commercial mixed use. Lot 7. The playground. That was proof. Real, verifiable, undeniable proof. Sarah drove to the city office the next morning. The clerk was polite, efficient, and strangely nervous. When she asked for public records on Lot 7, he hesitated. "You're with the HOA?" he asked. "No, just a resident." He sighed. "One moment." Minutes later, he returned with a thin folder. Inside were copies of application forms, stamped and signed. At the bottom of the page, under Authorized Representative, was a name in bold type, Gerald Langford. Sarah felt her stomach drop. "How long ago was this filed?" she asked. The clerk checked the date. About 4 months ago." For months. That was before the playground was fenced off. Before the community vote. Before any resident had been told a thing. She took photos of every page. When she left the office, she didn't go home. She went to the Willow Bend Gazette. The Gazette wasn't much. A small local paper, 2 pages thick, mostly ads and announcements. But it had one reporter who cared, Tom Reed. He was known for covering zoning disputes, land deals, and local corruption stories that bigger outlets ignored. Sarah met him at the coffee shop across the street. He listened as she explained everything, the meetings, the missing playground, the documents. When she finished, he leaned back, silent for a moment. "This isn't just shady," he said. "It's illegal. HOAs can't sell common land without a supermajority vote." "I know," Sarah said. "But no one's listening. Everyone's afraid of fines." Tom nodded slowly. "Let me look into it." He took copies of her documents, scribbled notes, and asked questions about the other board members. Before leaving, he said something that stuck with her. "People think HOAs are about lawns and fences. They forget they're corporations. And corporations, when left unchecked, always look for profit." Over the next few weeks, Tom started digging. He requested public filings, looked up Harper Development's records, even traced the shell company Lydia had mentioned. What he found was worse than Sarah expected. Harper Development had made several similar partnerships across the county, always with struggling or poorly managed HOAs. Each time, they promised beautification projects, then quietly bought land below market value. Most homeowners never even realized what had happened until the construction started. And in every case, the HOA president walked away with consulting bonuses. In Willow Bend, that bonus appeared in the form of a $42,000 community relations payment made to a company called Langford Solutions LLC. Sarah stared at the line item when Tom showed her the document. Langford Solutions, Gerald's company. He had literally paid himself with HOA funds. "Will people care?" she asked quietly. Tom looked at her. "If you have the courage to speak up, yes." But Gerald wasn't idle. Word of Sarah's investigation was spreading, and he was preparing his own narrative. He sent out a new newsletter titled, "The Truth About Willow Bend's Future." It claimed that misinformation was threatening progress, that a few residents were spreading confusion about a project meant to benefit everyone. And in bold at the bottom, false claims may result in disciplinary action under HOA Bylaws Section 4.7, defamation of board officials. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a threat. Some neighbors stopped talking to Sarah entirely. Others whispered when she walked by. Her kids came home from school saying their friends' parents told them not to get involved. It was isolation carefully crafted by design. Still, Sarah kept collecting emails, photos, statements from residents. Lydia continued leaking what she could, though she was terrified of being caught. One night, Lydia called her in a panic. "Sarah, he knows. Gerald knows I gave you the folder." "How?" "I don't know. But he confronted me after the meeting. Said I violated confidentiality. I think he's going to try to remove me from the board." "What can I do?" "Nothing," Lydia said. "Just keep going. Don't let him win." The call ended abruptly. That same night, Lydia's name disappeared from the HOA website, replaced by interim treasurer Douglas Kane, a man no one in the neighborhood had ever met. The next morning, Sarah opened her mailbox and froze. Inside was a violation notice. Fine, $150. Reason, unauthorized signage. She looked around her yard. The only thing visible was a small, hand-painted sign her daughter had made for school. "Save our playground." That was enough. By this point, Sarah wasn't just investigating. She was fighting back. She created a private Facebook group called Willow Bend Watchdog. Within hours, dozens of residents joined. They began sharing their own stories: unexpected fees, denied maintenance requests, threats of fines. It became clear that the playground sale wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. Through the group, Sarah learned something new. Gerald had recently filed for a personal home renovation permit for a new backyard pool. The approval was signed by the same zoning officer who'd approved the playground sale. Tom confirmed it and connected the dots. The developer's consulting payment had been routed through a construction firm that specialized in private pools. Gerald wasn't just selling community land. He was funding his lifestyle with it. By now, Sarah's determination had turned into quiet fury. She wasn't a natural activist. But when the system fails, sometimes ordinary people have to become extraordinary. She and Tom began preparing for exposure, a public reveal that would force accountability. Tom promised to publish the story once he verified every fact. But as they worked, something happened that neither of them expected. Late one evening, Sarah received a knock at her door. When she opened it, a folded piece of paper lay on her porch. No envelope, no signature, just a single sentence typed in bold. "Stop digging before you lose more than a playground." The paper trembled in her hands. Outside, the street was quiet, too quiet. A lone car idled at the corner, then drove off slowly. Sarah looked back toward the empty lot. The fence was still there, glinting under the streetlight. Behind it, a sign had just been added. It read, "Future site of Willow Bend Commons, coming soon." And beneath the logo of Harper Development was a small note in fine print. "A proud partnership with the Willow Bend HOA. Narrator, final voiceover, tone tightening." That was the night Sarah realized what she was truly up against. This wasn't just a playground dispute. It wasn't even about one corrupt president. It was a machine, polished, well-connected, and designed to silence anyone who got in its way. And in Willow Bend Estates, that machine was already in motion. The night was silent, yet Willow Bend Estates had never felt so loud. Each rustling leaf, each distant hum of a car, seemed amplified in Sarah Klein's mind as she clutched the note on her porch. "Stop digging before you lose more than a playground." The message was clear. It was not a suggestion. It was a warning. Yet Sarah couldn't stop. She wouldn't, because by now, she understood one undeniable truth. The playground wasn't just a patch of land. It was a symbol of her neighborhood's soul, a place stolen under the guise of improvement. The next morning, the empty lot looked different in daylight. The sun glinted harshly off the metal fence, casting long shadows across the gravel. Where the swings had once squeaked and the slide had gleamed, there was nothing but dirt and a single sign. "Future site of Willow Bend Commons, coming soon." A group of children gathered at the edges, holding the hands of parents who were equally confused. One boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why can't we play here anymore?" His mother sighed. "I don't know, honey. I don't know." And that, Sarah realized, was exactly what Gerald Langford wanted. Confusion, compliance, silence. Sarah began documenting everything. Photos of the empty lot, notes from the neighbors, copies of the threats, the flyers, the invoices. Every evening, she added more pieces to what she called the playground file. She soon noticed a pattern. Every week, new maintenance work appeared, but no one ever explained what it was for. First, the sand was removed, then the rubber mats, then the swing frames. Each morning, trucks arrived silently, workers unloading materials nobody had ordered. A crane came for 2 nights in a row, moving heavy steel beams that seemed far too large for a playground upgrade. Neighbors whispered among themselves. Mark Peterson, who lived across the street, muttered, "They're turning it into a parking lot, just like the plans." But nobody wanted to say it out loud. Fear had begun to settle over Willow Bend, quietly but thoroughly. Sarah's investigation revealed something even more troubling. The HOA was not only silent, it was actively working against anyone who questioned the changes. A week after the last crane, a letter arrived in her mailbox. Not from Gerald directly, but from a law firm representing the HOA. Ms. Klein, it has come to our attention that you have engaged in unauthorized activities regarding Willow Bend HOA property. Please be advised that further dissemination of false information will result in fines, up to and including legal action. Respectfully, Langford and Associates, attorneys for the HOA. Sarah read it twice. Unauthorized activities? Dissemination of false information? She had only spoken to a few neighbors and taken photos of a public lot. And yet, this was the beginning. The playground, she realized, wasn't just disappearing physically. It was disappearing from public view, from discussion, from memory. Over the next several days, the work intensified. The playground equipment was loaded onto trucks at dawn. The sandbox had been filled with gravel and covered by a tarp. The swing set was disassembled completely, pieces stacked neatly in the corner. The slide, once a bright rainbow of plastic, was gone entirely. Children stopped showing up. Parents, afraid of fines or further warnings, avoided lingering. The neighborhood began to feel like a ghost town. Silent streets, empty yards, and the constant hum of construction vehicles. Yet Gerald Langford remained the ever-present figure of reassurance in newsletters. We are committed to maintaining the beauty and safety of Willow Bend. Please remain patient as these necessary improvements are implemented. Words on paper, comforting only to those who did not see the truth. Sarah decided she needed proof, not just of the playground's disappearance, but of the mechanics behind it. She started tracking the trucks, noting license plates, company names, times of arrival and departure. She photographed workers unloading materials and compared it with the HOA invoices she had acquired. Pattern emerged. Most of the work was being conducted by Harper development contractors, billed to the HOA under vague line items like community enhancement or asset evaluation. One invoice caught her eye: removal and temporary storage of playground equipment, $12,450. Yet, when she called the company listed, they claimed no records existed. It was a ghost operation. Everything was documented, yet nothing could be verified. Sarah was not the only one watching. Neighbors began whispering, sharing suspicions, but fear lingered. A young mother named Jenna told Sarah her letter carrier warned her not to ask questions. Another neighbor, a retired teacher, admitted she'd been fined for posting on the community Facebook page about the playground. Intimidation was subtle, almost invisible. No one shouted. No one made threats in person. Instead, fines, letters, and silent pressure ensured compliance. And still, Gerald Langford maintained his polished persona. He attended small gatherings, smiling and shaking hands, while in the background, deals were being finalized. Sarah began attending the HOA board meetings again. Unlike before, these meetings were tense and tightly controlled. At the podium, Gerald presented progress reports filled with numbers, charts, and projections, all carefully crafted to hide the truth. Community enhancement, he repeated. Long-term value. Safety improvements. But questions from residents were dismissed or redirected. One elderly man asked, "What about the oak trees we used to picnic under?" Gerald smiled thinly. Unfortunately, certain landscaping must be altered to accommodate new infrastructure. Another parent asked about the children's playground. "It will be replaced in due course," Gerald replied. "But first, safety and modernization are priorities." The answers were vague, polite, but hollow. Sarah realized she was no longer fighting for the playground alone. She was now fighting for the truth. And the truth, she discovered, was starting to surface in unexpected ways. One evening, Lydia arrived at her door again, pale and anxious. "Sarah, they know we're keeping records." Gerald checked the neighborhood email lists. "He's watching. What do we do?" Sarah asked. "Keep documenting," Lydia said. "But be careful. He's smart. He knows the law, the loopholes, and he's using them." That night, Sarah stayed up late, reviewing every document, every email, every photograph she had taken over the past 2 months. Every pattern, every inconsistency, every suspicious movement. The HOA had created a facade, orderly, professional, and above reproach. But behind the facade, the playground, and everything it represented was disappearing. Soon, subtle changes began appearing on the lot itself. Workers dug trenches. Small survey markers were installed. A chain of small orange flags marked lines across the ground, signaling boundaries that no one explained. One morning, a bulldozer arrived, moving a small mound of dirt to one side. Neighbors called the HOA for explanations. The response was always the same: temporary adjustments for community improvement. Yet, for Sarah and the few who were paying attention, the message was clear. The playground was gone, and nothing could bring it back unless they acted. Sarah's strategy became methodical. She mapped every movement, every document, every fine issued to residents who questioned the changes. She began keeping a daily log: date, time, event, and photographic evidence. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's atmosphere was shifting. Parents avoided the lot. Children played indoors. Residents who might have objected whispered quietly to neighbors, afraid of fines or further warnings. The illusion of community was fracturing, and Gerald Langford was the unseen hand pulling the strings. Then came the most telling day. A city inspector arrived unannounced, clipboard in hand. Sarah watched from her window as the inspector examined the fenced-off lot, took photos, and jotted notes. Later that evening, she discovered in a public filing that Harper Development had applied for a permit to clear the lot entirely. The purpose? Commercial redevelopment of recreational land. It was confirmation. The playground was not being renovated. It was being sold. And the HOA? Complicit. Narrator, final voiceover, tone tightening. By the end of the month, the playground was no longer a place of joy. It had vanished piece by piece, hidden behind fencing, invoices, and legal loopholes. The laughter that once defined Willow Bend was silenced. But for Sarah Klein, this was only the beginning. Because behind the disappearing playground was a larger story. One of corruption, deception, and greed, waiting to be exposed. And she was determined to reveal it. In Willow Bend Estates, secrets don't stay hidden forever. They fester quietly, unnoticed by most, until someone like Sarah Klein comes along. Someone who notices, someone who questions, someone who refuses to stay silent. By the time she realized the playground was gone, she knew this wasn't just a minor HOA misstep. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, and it had been in motion long before the first swing was removed. It started with the documents Lydia had provided: emails, contracts, invoices. Sarah spent hours reviewing each one, tracing signatures and dates. And then she found it: Langford Solutions LLC. A shell company registered in Gerald Langford's name. No employees, no office, no phone number, just a mailing address. A company that, on paper, handled consulting services for Willow Bend. The emails showed transfers totaling over $40,000. Payments from the HOA, labeled Community Improvement or Development Coordination, were routed through Langford Solutions. Every dollar had a purpose: funding Gerald's lifestyle while obscuring the fact that the playground, everyone's playground, was being quietly sold. Sarah began calling around, reaching out to city offices, public records departments, and even Harper Development directly. The company representatives were polite, professional, and careful. When she asked about Lot 7, the playground, they feigned ignorance. All projects are confidential until approved, they said. But the documents in her hand said otherwise. And then came the zoning filings. Permits had been filed months earlier. The land was being reclassified, changing its status from recreational to commercial use. That reclassification, once finalized, would give the developer the legal right to do anything they wanted: remove the playground, install parking lots, even sell the land to a third party. All without a vote from the residents. Lydia came over one evening, her face pale. "They've got everything," she said. "They've covered every angle." "Who?" Sarah asked. "Gerald. Harper Development. The city inspector who signed the zoning change. Every document, every loophole. They've planned it so no one can stop them, legally." Sarah sat back in her chair. She looked at the stack of papers on her kitchen table. Invoices, emails, public filings, permits, threat letters. It was overwhelming, but it was proof. The deeper Sarah dug, the more intricate the web became. She discovered that Harper Development had a history of similar deals. Across the county, they targeted HOAs with vulnerable leadership, promising community improvements. In reality, they quietly acquired land, always paying less than market value, always using shell companies or legal loopholes. Every single time, residents were left confused, threatened, or silenced. In Willow Bend, it was the same story. The playground had been the first target, but the plan extended beyond swings and slides. Future projects, once completed, would bring in parking lots, commercial spaces, and potentially high-end condominiums. Sarah realized this was bigger than any playground. This was corruption wrapped in bureaucracy, the kind of corruption that thrives in silence, unseen, unquestioned, unstoppable unless someone dared to expose it. And Sarah was that someone. She called Tom Reed, the reporter she had been working with. He listened carefully as she explained everything she had uncovered. Shell company, she said. Zoning permits filed months before the meeting. Threat letters. Developer involvement. Everything points to a premeditated scheme. Tom's expression darkened. This isn't just shady, Sarah. It's criminal. Misrepresentation. Coercion. Maybe fraud. Then what do we do? She asked. We document everything, he said. Emails, permits, invoices, photos. Every single piece of evidence counts. Once we have enough, we expose it publicly. That night, Sarah and Lydia worked late into the evening. They photocopied documents, printed emails, and scanned every page. They mapped out a timeline, from the first email to the final zoning filing, so that any observer could see the step-by-step plan Gerald had executed. And the more they mapped, the more chilling it became. Each step was calculated. Each action designed to prevent residents from intervening. Each document carefully worded to create plausible deniability. It was a masterclass in deception. Meanwhile, Gerald continued to present a polished facade. At public HOA meetings, he smiled, answered questions superficially, and praised the community for their patience. He emphasized progress, community spirit, and future value. No one in the room could see the contracts hidden in plain sight, the shell company, or the money changing hands behind the scenes. To the casual observer, everything looked normal. But for Sarah and her small group of allies, the picture was terrifyingly clear. The first breakthrough came when they noticed a series of unusual transactions. Invoices from Langford Solutions were often split into smaller amounts, just below reporting thresholds. Funds were routed through multiple accounts, sometimes to accounts labeled as community events, sometimes to construction services. It was a web of financial smokescreens, designed to appear legitimate while hiding the ultimate purpose: the sale of the playground. Sarah realized that if they could trace even one of these transactions publicly, it would expose Gerald and Harper Development. And if the residents saw it, the facade of community improvement would crumble. Then came the next revelation. The HOA board itself had been neutered. Lydia explained that Gerald had systematically removed or sidelined board members who asked questions. Meeting minutes were altered. Voting procedures were bypassed. Public notices were delayed or edited. The residents had no legal recourse unless they knew exactly what had been done, and most of them didn't. The playground's disappearance wasn't just physical. It was institutional. The system itself had been weaponized. Sarah and Tom began planning their public exposure strategy. They decided to verify every document and cross-check dates, record photographic evidence of the empty lot and ongoing construction, map the financial transactions to show how HOA funds were funneled to Gerald personally, interview residents who had been intimidated or fined for questioning the process. Each step had to be meticulous. One mistake could give Gerald and his allies a legal shield, but the alternative, silence, was unacceptable. As they prepared, the atmosphere in Willow Bend grew tense. Parents still whispered about the playground. Children asked questions they could not understand. Neighbors who had previously ignored the situation began noticing unusual activity. Trucks arriving in the early morning, surveyors marking the lot late at night, workers carrying heavy materials. And still, Gerald's newsletter appeared, smiling and reassuring. Our goal remains the safety and enjoyment of the Willow Bend community. We thank you for your patience as progress continues." Words that now sounded hollow, almost mocking. One evening, Sarah and Lydia visited the empty lot together. Under the glow of a single streetlight, the metal fence seemed taller, more ominous. The sign boasting the future Willow Bend Commons gleamed under the light. No swings, no sandbox, no laughter, only gravel, dirt, and the silence of lost memories. Lydia whispered, "It's worse than I thought. They're not just selling the playground, they're erasing it." Sarah's jaw tightened. "They're counting on everyone forgetting, counting on us being afraid." She looked at the chain-link fence, the stacked steel beams, the orange safety markers. "We can't let that happen," she said. "And we won't." Narrator, final investigative tone. The secret deal had been exposed, at least to Sarah and her allies. But the real challenge was only beginning. Bringing the truth to the entire community, overcoming fear, and confronting the very people who had orchestrated the disappearance of an entire neighborhood landmark. Because in Willow Bend Estates, some battles are not fought on the playground. They are fought in boardrooms, in emails, and in the quiet moments when ordinary people decide to stand up. And Sarah Klein was ready to fight. In Willow Bend Estates, silence had been the enemy. For weeks, residents had complied, uncertain, confused, or simply afraid. But as the playground lay dismantled, fenced off, and forgotten, a quiet resistance began to stir. It started small, murmurs between neighbors, whispers over fences, casual complaints at the corner store. Parents questioned, "What happened to the swings?" Retirees asked, "When will the sandbox return?" And slowly, some began looking at Sarah Klein differently. Sarah had become the focus, though she didn't seek it. Word spread that she was documenting everything, keeping meticulous records of emails, invoices, permits, and photographs. People were hesitant at first. Fear had a strong grip. HOA fines and legal threats were enough to make most residents hesitate. Yet fear cannot last forever. It falters when people begin to see the truth. The first ally was Mark Peterson, a man who lived across from the empty lot. A retired engineer, he had always taken an interest in neighborhood projects. One evening, he knocked on Sarah's door, a folder of his own in hand. "I've been keeping notes," he said quietly. "Times, trucks, workers, dates of deliveries, and I've got pictures from my security camera." Sarah smiled, not because the information was surprising, but because she realized something critical. She was no longer alone. Others followed. A young mother, Jenna, admitted she had been fined $75 for putting up a small, "Save Our Playground" sign. An elderly couple, the Carters, showed Sarah letters threatening them for asking about the oak trees. Even a few teenagers shared photos they had taken surreptitiously from their phones. Snapshots of surveyors, steel beams, and workers arriving in the dead of night. Together, they formed a loose network, a web of evidence and determination. Sarah realized the most powerful tool in their hands was not anger, but truth. But Gerald Langford had noticed the stirrings. In his mind, it was no longer enough to quietly silence residents. The subtle threats and fines hadn't stopped Sarah. Now he needed action. It began with letters, not to Sarah directly but to her allies. Warnings about fines for unauthorized documentation. Notices about interference in HOA operations. Then came the veiled confrontations. Mark Peterson returned home one afternoon to find a white envelope slid under his door. Inside, a printed letter stating he had been observed photographing restricted areas and that further incidents could result in legal action. No signature, no return address. It was intimidation by implication. Silent, professional, and calculated to instill fear. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. It was a classic strategy. Isolate the leader, scare the followers, and undermine the movement before it gained momentum. But she refused to be intimidated. Instead, she doubled her efforts. She organized a private meeting in her garage, inviting only those she trusted. Everyone brought their evidence, invoices, photos, emails, permits. They compared notes, cross-referenced timelines, and built a chronological record of events from the first mention of community improvement to the present. It was staggering. The level of premeditation, coordination, and deceit was almost surgical. The playground had been sold behind everyone's backs. Every step had been planned and executed without accountability. But resistance brought retaliation. One evening, Sarah returned home to find her mailbox ripped open, papers scattered across her lawn. The playground file, meticulously compiled over weeks, had been tampered with. Some documents were missing. Some were crumpled. It was a message, "We are watching." Sarah did not panic. She collected the papers, documented the damage, and moved forward. Fear would not win. Meanwhile, in the HOA boardroom, Gerald met with Harper Development representatives. Through closed doors, deals were discussed. Timelines, construction schedules, and contingencies in case residents attempted to interfere. He was calm, controlled, confident that the threats and fines would maintain order. He did not know that Sarah's network was growing stronger by the day. Neighbors who had once been silent began to speak. At first, it was cautious. Questions during HOA meetings, polite complaints in newsletters, quiet discussions with Tom Reed, the reporter. But soon, more overt acts appeared. Signs reading, "Where's our playground?" appeared in yards, letters demanding explanations were submitted to city officials, and emails requesting public disclosure of HOA decisions multiplied. The network of resistance had transformed from whispers to action. Gerald's response was predictable. He escalated. First, a series of fines were issued. Then, letters threatening legal action. Finally, a direct approach. Sarah received a visit from a private security firm claiming to be hired by the HOA to ensure community safety. The message was clear: stop or face consequences. Sarah remained resolute. She documented the visit, recorded the interaction, and shared it with Tom Reed. Every move by Gerald was being exposed, every act of intimidation logged. The turning point came during a board meeting. Sarah and a small group of allies attended. They quietly set up a camera to record the proceedings. When Gerald attempted to downplay concerns about the playground, residents began asking pointed questions. "Why was Lot 7 reclassified without a vote?" one neighbor demanded. "Why were funds transferred to Langford Solutions LLC?" asked another. The room shifted. Some residents were surprised, others confused. Gerald's usual calm facade cracked, just slightly, but enough. It was clear. The facade could not last forever. Every lie, every obfuscation, every shell company, it was now at risk of exposure. Sarah and her allies understood the stakes. If they failed, the playground and possibly more community spaces would be permanently lost. If they succeeded, they would show that even in a controlled, intimidating environment, ordinary residents could fight back. The resistance continued to grow. More neighbors joined the cause, bringing stories of intimidation, missing documents, and unusual HOA activity. The network's evidence became overwhelming. Photographs, copies of invoices, emails, permits, even recordings of Gerald's statements at meetings. And slowly, the balance began to shift. Where fear once ruled, truth began to take root. Narrator, final investigative tone. Resistance had begun. Retaliation was inevitable. And in Willow Bend Estates, the battle for the playground was no longer just about swings and slides. It was about exposing the very corruption that threatened the heart of the community. Sarah Klein understood this. The fight would be long, difficult, and dangerous, but the neighborhood's soul depended on it. Because in the end, the playground was more than a place to play. It was a symbol of trust, of innocence, and of the right of ordinary people to protect their own community. And some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. In Willow Bend Estates, the air had grown thick with tension. The playground was gone, the streets quiet, and the neighborhood's trust fractured. Yet in the shadows, a new player was preparing to enter the scene. Someone with knowledge that could change everything. It began with a call to Sarah Klein's phone late one evening. The voice was low, cautious. "I have information about the playground sale and the HOA," the caller said. "Meet me, and come alone." Sarah hesitated, but she knew this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She agreed. The next day, in a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of Willow Bend, Sarah met the whistleblower. He introduced himself as Daniel Harris, a former accountant for Langford Solutions LLC. A man in his early 40s, with sharp eyes and a nervous demeanor, Daniel seemed more concerned about survival than recognition. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "They're watching everything. Emails, phone calls, even the security cameras on the streets." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because they're doing it again," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "All of it. The playground, the Oak Grove future parcels. They've been systematically siphoning funds through shell companies and fake invoices. I have the evidence." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, accounting logs, emails between Gerald and Harper Development, and internal memos marked confidential. It was the smoking gun she had been searching for. Daniel explained how he had discovered the scheme months earlier. Payments from the HOA to Langford Solutions had been misclassified as community improvement, but were funneled into Gerald's personal accounts. Harper Development had orchestrated the sale with precision. Shell companies, backdated contracts, and permits filed under false pretenses. "It wasn't just the playground," Daniel said. "They're planning more." The playground was the first domino. If no one stopped them, they'd have taken the next lots, then the next. Sarah realized the scale of the deception. This wasn't local mismanagement. It was a carefully executed exploitation, designed to extract wealth from the community while keeping residents in the dark. With Daniel's evidence, Sarah and her allies had the proof they needed. They spent nights cross-referencing documents, mapping the transactions, and creating a timeline that left no room for doubt. The whistleblower's return had turned suspicion into certainty, but it also made the fight more dangerous. Daniel had taken a huge risk by coming forward, and Sarah knew that Gerald would stop at nothing to protect himself. Meanwhile, Gerald remained in control of the HOA's public narrative. He continued to issue newsletters, host meetings, and assure residents that everything was for the good of the community. Yet cracks were beginning to appear. A few residents had started asking more pointed questions, referencing the missing playground and unusual financial transactions. Gerald's usual calm veneer faltered during one particularly tense meeting. When a resident asked about payments to Langford Solutions, he deflected. "Those are confidential corporate accounts," he said. When pressed, he simply adjourned the meeting, leaving a room of unsettled neighbors. Sarah knew it was time for a public confrontation. She organized a community forum, inviting residents, local journalists, and city officials. The goal was clear: expose Gerald and Harper Development in front of everyone. The night of the forum, the community center was packed. Whispers filled the room as Sarah, Daniel, and Tom Reed set up their presentation. Photos of the dismantled playground, spreadsheets showing the misappropriated funds, and copies of permits were displayed for all to see. Residents who had been silent for months now had their questions answered. Parents demanded accountability. Retirees pointed out irregularities. Teenagers displayed photos they had taken secretly. The room shifted from uncertainty to outrage. Daniel took the floor. He explained how Langford Solutions LLC had funneled HOA funds, how Harper Development had planned the playground sale months in advance, and how Gerald Langford had misrepresented facts to residents. The evidence was irrefutable, and for the first time, Gerald's power was challenged openly. The confrontation was tense. Gerald tried to deflect, accusing Daniel of being disgruntled. He questioned Sarah's motives, labeling her as a troublemaker. But the community had seen the documents, the photos, the emails. Whispers grew louder. People were no longer afraid. For the first time, the truth had a voice. The fallout was immediate. Several board members who had been silent began questioning Gerald's decisions. City officials promised investigations. Local journalists prepared articles exposing the fraudulent activity. And the playground, the heart of Willow Bend's battle, became a symbol of deception, resistance, and the courage of ordinary residents willing to stand up against corruption. Sarah realized that the whistleblower's return had changed everything. Not only did they have proof, but they had momentum. The community, once silenced, was awakening. Fear no longer ruled Willow Bend. And Gerald Langford, once untouchable, now faced scrutiny he could not easily escape. Narrator, final investigative tone. In Willow Bend Estates, the battle for truth had entered a new phase. The playground, once stolen, had sparked a resistance that could not be ignored. With the whistleblower's evidence, public scrutiny, and the determination of residents, the hidden corruption of the HOA was finally being exposed. But in this fight, exposure alone was not enough. Because when power and deception collide, retaliation is inevitable, and the cost of standing up can be higher than anyone expects. Sarah Klein understood this clearly. Yet she also knew one undeniable fact. Some truths, once revealed, cannot be hidden, and Willow Bend Estates would never be the same again. The air in Willow Bend Estates had shifted. Gone was the quiet resignation that had defined the neighborhood in recent months. In its place stood a simmering tension, the kind that comes when a community realizes it has been deceived, manipulated, and robbed of something sacred. At the center of it all was Gerald Langford, once untouchable, now facing scrutiny unlike anything he had anticipated. It began on a Monday morning. Sarah Klein arrived at the community center to find it buzzing with activity. Residents who had once avoided confrontation were now gathered, armed with evidence, photographs, and a determination that radiated from every conversation. Signs reading, "Bring back our playground," were discreetly pinned to walls. Emails had been sent to city officials, reporters were arriving, and local news crews prepared cameras in the parking lot. It was, in every sense, a neighborhood ready to confront the truth. Inside the boardroom, Gerald's demeanor was measured, but tension crept in at the edges. He had called an emergency HOA meeting, insisting it was to clarify community concerns. He believed he could regain control, redirect attention, and silence dissent with words alone. He was wrong. Sarah and Daniel arrived early, carrying binders thick with proof. Invoices showing misappropriated funds, emails proving prior knowledge of the playground sale, and spreadsheets detailing transactions through Langford Solutions LLC. It was overwhelming evidence, and they intended for everyone to see it. The meeting began. Gerald took the podium, smiling as he greeted the residents. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Thank you for coming. We value your patience and feedback." But before he could continue, Sarah stepped forward. She placed the first binder on the table, opening it to a spreadsheet. "This is what you've done," she said calmly, but with a firmness that carried through the room. "These are the transactions, the permits, the invoices, and the shell company you used to sell the playground without our knowledge or consent." A murmur spread through the crowd. Whispers of shock, disbelief, and finally, outrage. Gerald's response was immediate, but defensive. "This is misrepresentation," he said, voice tight. "These are corporate accounts, standard practices for community improvement. There is nothing illegal here." "Standard practices?" Sarah asked, flipping to a page showing Langford Solutions transfers to Gerald personally. "You funneled tens of thousands of dollars from HOA funds into your own account. You sold the playground without a vote. How is that standard?" The room grew tense. Residents stood, asking questions they had long kept inside. "How could you?" one parent demanded. "Why us?" asked another. Daniel stepped forward, presenting emails from Harper Development. "They planned this months in advance," he said. "Lot 7 was never meant for renovation. It was meant for commercial sale. The playground was a pawn in a premeditated scheme." Gasps filled the room. Even board members who had supported Gerald could no longer ignore the evidence. For the first time, Gerald's polished facade cracked. He attempted to regain control, raising his voice, emphasizing legality and community improvement. But it was too late. The combination of evidence, public attention, and resident outrage was unstoppable. Sarah noticed something subtle but powerful: the board members' hesitation. Some had voted in Gerald's favor for years out of fear or complacency. Now, seeing the evidence laid bare, they realized complicity could no longer protect them. Outside, cameras from local news stations began filming. Footage of the empty playground lot, the fenced-off area, and residents holding documents provided visual proof that could no longer be ignored. The pressure intensified. City officials arrived, reviewing permits and HOA filings on the spot. Legal advisors for the HOA were summoned to assess potential violations and mismanagement. Gerald, once confident in his control, was now cornered. He attempted to justify the actions, but every argument was countered with evidence. Every claim was met with documentation, emails, and the voices of residents united. The climax came when Sarah read aloud the final email chain, a series of communications between Gerald and Harper development executives. It detailed the playground sale, the method for transferring funds through Langford Solutions, and strategies to ensure residents remained unaware. The room was silent. No one could deny the facts. A board member, previously loyal to Gerald, spoke up. This is unacceptable. We've been lied to, misled. The playground belongs to the community, and we must rectify this immediately. Another resident added, "We trusted you, Gerald. You stole more than swings and slides. You stole our trust." Faced with overwhelming evidence, public scrutiny, and a united community, Gerald had no choice. The HOA was forced to acknowledge wrongdoing. Permits were suspended. Legal action was initiated to reverse the sale. Langford Solutions LLC came under investigation for misappropriation of funds. The playground, though damaged, could be restored. The fences would come down, the swings reinstalled, and the sandbox refilled. Sarah stood outside the lot days later, watching as workers returned the playground to its rightful place. Children ran freely, laughter echoing across the neighborhood. Parents smiled, tears in their eyes, knowing that resistance had won. Daniel, now safe from retaliation, stood beside her. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," Sarah replied. "We did it. The community did it. We all stood up when it mattered most." In Willow Bend Estates, the playground was more than a place to play. It was a symbol of trust, of vigilance, and of the power of ordinary people united against corruption. The HOA, once untouchable, had been held accountable. The shell companies, the secret deals, the intimidation, all exposed. And while some scars remained, the neighborhood had reclaimed its voice, its playground, and its community spirit, because in the end, truth, courage, and unity had prevailed. The playground had returned, and Willow Bend Estates would never forget the lesson it had learned. That even in the face of calculated deception, ordinary people could fight for justice and win. If stories like this, hidden truths, community battles, and the fight against corruption keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to see our latest investigations. Join the HOA Drama Club family, where every story uncovers the secrets behind the quiet streets, and every voice matters. Because in a world full of hidden stories, we reveal what others try to hide. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.